After the tragic death of Sarah Everard, grieving women came out to show solidarity in a candlelit vigil. Just as BLM had encapsulated the moment that was the death of George Floyd, these mournings encapsulated the mood of many across the nation. The memorial vigil turned ugly when the women were told to disperse and then were forcefully removed by the police. The actions were described as acting appropriately by a police review of the events and backed by Home Secretary Priti Patel. It was fateful timing for a government attempting to push a bill through Parliament that would heavily restrict the right to protest and expand police powers to shut down demonstrations, even peaceful ones. Now, despite all efforts to make the Sarah Everard vigil COVID compliant and officially sanctioned, the police refused due to COVID safety concerns, as was their right. The local council deferred to the police and they exercised a power that the majority of our MPs gave them willingly, and much of the country and the media not only accepted but often decried as being insufficient. Anti-lockdown protests were condemned as super spreader events, whilst BLM protests were cheered. We cannot allow our support of the right to protest to become confused with our dislike of the causes of the protests. For the best part of a year, there has been a small group of journalists and campaigners who have pushed back against the removal of many of our civil liberties, rightly pointing out that once taken away, these rights are often difficult to get back. They have been marginalised and slandered as not caring enough or being COVID deniers. But this is the exact situation that they warned of. One where the police would abuse the powers that have been granted to them as part of the COVID laws. Last weekend, protesters led by Piers Corbyn and actor Lawrence Fox marched through London calling for an end to lockdowns and restrictions. There were clashes with police later that evening, with the Metro reporting that glass bottles were thrown at the police, and a group of around 100 chased police vehicles, punching and kicking them as they left the area. And now we've seen protests flare up all across the country over this past week. There has been a number of Kill the Bill protests in Bristol over the past 2 weeks, the latest of which involved a sit-down to block the M32. 7 arrests were made and the police clashed with protesters. In London, 10 officers were injured and 26 people were arrested in Kill the Bill protests, where police again clashed with protesters. And there were also demonstrations in Newcastle, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, Cardiff, Oxford, Cambridge and Dorset. There have even been allegations swirling on Twitter that one individual who unfurled a kill cops banner was later seen to be working with the Met Police, suggesting that the police are happy to send in undercover agents to provoke more violence and animosity to protests and demonstrations. In Northern Ireland, there have been appeals for peace after nights of rioting in Derry, in Newtownabbey, Carrickfergus and in Belfast, triggered by loyalist anger over the Irish Sea border. 3 cars were hijacked on Friday night and set alight, and petrol bombs were launched at the police. There were also clashes at Sandy Row, where projectiles were once again thrown at the police. These are the actions of an increasingly desperate and volatile situation. More than a year of lockdowns has been unnatural and incredibly difficult for many to handle, and it is no wonder that people are lashing out when they are given an excuse, whether you consider the cause to be legitimate or not. It is becoming increasingly clear that lockdowns and the lack of freedom have and will continue to cause civil unrest. They may not be causing the protests, but they are certainly exacerbating them. We cannot treat an adult population as if they are all children. We cannot allow the police and a government who have shown a very willing disregard for human rights, civil rights and democratic norms to use COVID as an excuse to push through laws that would make authoritarians grin. This cause should unite everyone, regardless of political affiliation, to stand up for the rights and freedoms that our ancestors fought and died for by the millions.